I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, my friend from the very popular radio show Operation Freedom. I'm talking about Dr. Dave Janda. Dr. Dave Janda, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you very much, Greg. Hey, Greg, you need to qualify that very popular Operation Freedom radio show. The deep state, I'm not very popular with folks in the deep state or folks actually from the right side of the political equation or the left side of the equation. Every time I'm on your show and I talk about there's one political party, the Republicrats, and they're owned and operated by the same criminal syndicate, I get a lot of real positive feedback there. You can imagine from both sides of the aisle.
Well, on USAWatchdog.com, you're one of the most popular people, and just so you know about your contacts, which you can't disclose your contacts. I happen to know who some of them are because you've kind of told me, but I will never tell who they are. And you built up contacts in law enforcement, and in intelligence sources, and in political contacts, and good ones through 30 years of going in and out of Washington, helping with healthcare issues and things like that. Correct?
That's correct. And actually, folks can get an idea of who my contacts are and where my contacts come from. If they go to my radio show and take a look at which guests I have on, they'll get an idea of who my contacts are, but that's not the entirety of my contacts. I have a number of other contacts that are, if you will, behind the curtain, but still, if you will, beyond associated, still have a relationship with either the Pentagon or the intelligence agencies or the like. But if folks want to get an idea of who some of my contacts are who are willing to come forward, all they have to do is look at the archives of our radio show and our guest list.
Okay, good deal. Let's start with the economy. It's looking bizarre. We up in my weekly news wrap up. I said, the markets are up, 500 points one day and down 800 points next day, and up and down, and they're positive territory, negative territory. You open up with a 10-year Treasury at 3.21, 22, 23, and then it's down to 3.15, which is a huge move in the multi-trillion-dollar Treasury market. What are your sources, and what do you think about what's going on with the economy? We're teetering, are we not?
Oh, yes, I believe we're teetering, and I believe we've been teetering for a long time. In fact, I believe we've been teetering since before the crash of 2008. And I believe this recovery, if that's what you want to call it, between 2008 and what we're seeing today, I believe is a recovery based on not even smoke and mirrors. I'd actually say vapor. And the vapor has been this huge amount of money creation by the globalist syndicate and their arms, the central banks. Now, it's interesting, Greg, you mentioned the volatility we're seeing in the market. Down 800, up 300, down 500, up to, in decades gone by, my dad, who was one of the smartest business people I've ever known, used to say, Dave, when you look at the stock market, if you start seeing increasing volatility, highs and ups and downs, big bounces, he goes, that's an indication that the market is in the beginning phases of a significant turn. So he said, if the market's high and you start seeing this big volatility up and down, anticipate the next big move and prolonged move will be down, and vice versa. Now, that's in decades gone by. And we all know the rules of economics, the rules of finance have essentially, and the rules of investing have essentially been thrown out the window. And the reason is because of the emergence, if you will, of these high frequency trading platforms that are run by machines, and the human equation is essentially, or human input is essentially relegated to the side. And I think this is one of the reasons why we see such volatility, but also why we've seen this unending increase, if you will, in the stock market indices. If you just look at the fundamentals behind the economy, and a number of folks that are very supportive of President Trump are going to get upset with me at this. But when President Trump was running for the presidency, he was not bashful about saying, this is a bubble. The numbers are bogus. The unemployment rate is far higher than what's stated by the government.
Yep.
The inflation rate is far higher than what the government is saying. In fact, very similar to a great guest you have on, John Williams, who I believe is the best forensic economist on the planet.
Yeah.
And you just did an interview recently with John Williams, and in fact, I believe if I'm accurate in representing your interview with him correctly, he is not a proponent that this is the best economy our country has ever seen, and that there is a lot of smoke and mirrors and vapor in the system.
But he does say we do have. He does say we do have a kind of a small growing economy. We do have and the Fed's killing it off with these raising these interest rates.
Right, and they've actually propped it up with all the money printing that they've been involved with over the past decade now. So there was just a number that was released on Friday. It said that the housing sales are the worst they've been. Existing home sales, I believe, the worst they've been since 2015. And we see that, for example, in the last employment data, it was projected, I believe, that there was going to be 185,000 new jobs created, and the number came in light at 135,000 jobs created. So what I'm saying is that what President Trump was saying when he was running for the presidency, I believe, was accurate. Now, understand something. President Trump was put in a situation that is, from a financial standpoint, impossible.
Yeah.
Because I believe that when he took over the reins of power and had access to the information, I believe he came to the realization that the numbers were far worse than what the mainstream media and political pundits had been discussing when it came to the economy. And he decided, I believe, well, look, this is really, and one of the issues I believe he came in contact with that he was unaware of was what the information that Mark Skidmore, who's been on your show and my show, Catherine Austin Fitts, has come forward about the missing $21 trillion that has occurred between 1998 and 2015 in just two departments, the Department of Defense and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So what that essentially did is doubled our national debt, in 1 second from when he was told about it to before not having any knowledge about it.
Yeah, I think that surprised him.
And I think right then and there, this is why he brought some of the deep state players, globalist players like Mnuchin and Gary Cohn in around him, saying, okay, boys, I get what you guys have done and how you've manipulated the system. And the bottom line, and essentially, it's almost like a hostage situation. You know what? If this ship is going to sink, if that's what you're going to try to do to me, you're going to be on board when this ship goes down with me. So what you're going to do is we're going to make this work. And I believe what he's been doing under the hood, he's been trying, if you will, through the tax cuts. And let's face it, with the tax cuts, everybody loves a tax cut. But what we've also seen is we've seen our national debt significantly increasing. I think we're up to, $21.5 trillion?
Yep. That's why he's talking about
and let's face it, when you have that kind of debt, and then add to it another 21 trillion, at least that we're aware of, and it could be significantly greater than that, and then we have all of our unfunded liabilities, we're talking tens of trillions of dollars beyond 21.5 trillion.
Extra.
Right. So I truly believe, and I've discussed this before on your show, that Donald Trump is the president for a reason. And if you look at his business background, he was very good at a number of different things. Building buildings, being a logistics pioneer when it comes to the purchase, the development of properties, real estate. But he was also great at dealing with bankruptcy.
Yes.
And the hard numbers of our economy and our financial system right now in the United States is we're bankrupt. And frankly, I can't think of a better person to have leading the charge, as it is Trump, because of his experience in bankruptcy. So when you have a situation like this, economically, what can you do? Well, you can grow out of it. Well, I think he's trying to do some of that by bringing manufacturing back to the United States, bringing corporations back to the United States,
oil drilling,
cutting regulations, making things better from a business environment to hire more Americans, for the companies to be more productive. Now, is that going to generate enough to cancel out the debt, cancel out this extra 21 trillion and all these unfunded liabilities? No. That's why I believe he has a multi-pronged attack when it comes to dealing with the ongoing bankruptcy. And let's face it, we've been bankrupt for a lot longer than Trump has been in office, for decades.
Yeah.
And I believe one thing that he's pushed on is, okay, let's cut taxes. Let's try to grow the economy as much as we can, knowing full well we can't grow it further all the way to get us out of this bankruptcy issue, out of our debt issue, out of all this extra funny money that was created that nobody's fessing up to. And the other way to handle it is to inflate our way out of it. In other words, reduce the value of the dollar in comparison to commodities, to other countries' currencies, whatever it might be. Now, to date, the dollar's been strong, right? But Trump has voiced support for making the dollar weaker. And then the other thing to handle a bankruptcy situation is to default on the current debt. And you've brought this up, Greg. What did Donald Trump say about Puerto Rico and their debt?
We're going to let that go.
What did he say?
We're going to let that go.
We're going to let it go. Well, what does that mean? It means we're going to default on it, correct?
We're not going to bail them out.
We're not going to bail them out. They're going to have to default.
Yeah, they did default.
Right. So, and again, if you look at how Trump has dealt with bankruptcy in the past, in some of his subsidiaries of his main corporation, it's all of the above that we just spoke about. And I believe that's what he's trying to implement currently with our country. Now, I believe Donald Trump came to the quick realization, he's a smart guy. I mean, love him or hate him, he's a smart guy. And anyone who doesn't believe he's a smart guy, you know what? He's going to play you. I mean, he's going to play you. He's a smart guy who has tremendous amounts of information. And he utilizes that information in many different ways. But I believe Trump very quickly realized, and it could have been at that first meeting in the Oval Office with Obama after he was elected. Remember, he looked a little bit off. He seemed a little almost stunned. And I believe one of the reasons he was stunned is because I believe at that pre-meeting before that little photo op session in the Oval Office, I believe he became knowledgeable about the true finances of our country. And he had a plan going into that, before that meeting. Okay, when I get in there, I'm going to do A, B, C. And this is going to get us on the right track, and we're going to grow out of this, and we're going to and we're going to have a little bit of an inflationary environment in the thing to diminish the value of the dollar, increase the price, and we're going to, okay, we got it. Well, I believe when he got in that meeting, Greg, it wasn't just A, B, and C. I think he thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to do D through Z because to get out of this mess.
Yeah, I don't see how they can do it without defaulting.
Right, and so what has he been doing in the past week and a half?
Talking about 5% budget cuts, except for the military?
Well, so again, right, reduce regulations, reduce budgets, cut spending, as you do in any business when the revenues are not where you need them, right? When you're expenditures are far exceeding your revenues. You tighten the belt.
If
That's
you can't
any good business
grow,
person would say.
if you can't grow revenue, you cut expenditures.
Right. But what else he's been doing is he's been pointing the finger at the Fed. Right?
Yep.
He's been pointing the finger at the Fed, exactly where he should be. Because you see, what the globalist syndicate, their tentacle, as we've discussed before, are the central banking systems, and in particular in the United States, the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is one of the entities that is directly responsible for this financial mess our country is currently in.
All the
Now,
bailouts and money printing.
Now you'd never see Barack Obama or the Bushes, either of them, or Bill Clinton, point at the Fed and say what Trump has said. I mean, he said, quote, "I think the Fed has gone crazy. I think the Fed is making a mistake. They're so tight," about interest rates. "I think the Fed has gone crazy." Just the other day on Fox Business News, quote, "My biggest threat is the Fed," end quote. Quote, "The Fed is raising rates too fast and it's too independent." Now, wait a minute. Listen to that. Is too independent. Now, when was the last time you heard a president of the United States say the Fed was independent? You and I know, and I hope 99.9% of our listeners know, that the Fed is not part of the executive branch of the United States government, judicial branch, or legislative branch. It is a group of independent bankers that serves the interests of the banks. And they took control of our money supply back in 1913. As G. Edward Griffin, great book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, he dissects. That should be mandatory reading for everybody. And it was with the Fed taking control of our money supply back in 1913 and their, quote, independence. Let me tell you something. They love all the sister organizations, banking syndicate organizations, banking groups. That's who is their priority. So when he says the Fed is raising rates too fast, my biggest threat is the Fed, and it's too independent. What he's saying is they're looking out for their own interests. They're not looking out for the interests of our country or for you or for me or for any American. And he's right. And I don't know of any, I cannot put a finger on any other president that's ever had the guts enough to say that. Now, some people will say Kennedy, because Kennedy reportedly was working on, if you will, taking the power away from the Fed, and then he took that little card trip in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, and we all know what happened then.
Yeah, we had a change of the government without an election.
Right, but obviously Trump believes, I think he got in there and he said, okay, we have to grow the stock market, we have to grow the economy, we got to get people's perceptions up. And I think he took these globalists that were around him, Mnuchin and Cohen and Wilbur Ross and all these guys, and said, okay, boys, you guys have pumped this thing up on a smoke and mirrors basis. You're going to keep pumping it up. In fact, you're going to keep pumping this thing up so like you've never done before, because we're going to get it to a level. We're going to get it to a level where people realize, hey, what Trump's doing, everything's okay. And then his plan was, because he knew this thing was rigged to blow, the economy, the financial system, he was going to start pointing the finger at the globalists, the Fed. And I believe that's where we are right now. So, and this is why I believe we're seeing the volatility, because I think the cycle has run its course. And I think this is why in the past week and a half, Trump has been pointing the finger repetitively. It wasn't just these two interviews that he spoke about the problem being the Fed, the threat being the Fed. He's been hammering this day in and day out on Twitter, on his speeches where he's been going around the country. Last night or the other night he was in Montana, and the other night, he hits it every place he goes. And I believe he's doing that because he sees the volatility in the market. He sees that when there's such volatility, it means that there's a turn coming, because ultimately you can have all the criminals in the world trying to manipulate a market, but the market's going to win in the long run. It might take longer than one would think, but the market and market dynamics in the history of our world it might have been manipulated, it might have been criminally manipulated, but sooner or later, the dynamics overwhelm the criminals. And I think Trump sees that. And I believe what he's doing is, this is why right now, in the past week and a half, he's been calling out the Fed and essentially the globalist syndicate.
I talked to Jim Sinclair not long before I got on the phone with you. He was on Skype, and I just had a quick conversation with him. And he says, Trump's just got to get to the midterm elections. He said he's just got to but he says it's dicey. It's dicey. And he's wondering out loud to me, he said, I wonder if Jerome Powell, the Fed head, I wonder if he is playing Trump's foil, that he is just playing his part with the Federal Reserve, that this is all just an act that has been predetermined. What do your sources say about how dicey the economy is? I mean, everybody knows in your world, and all the way up to some of your top sources in the government, that this is going to blow. And sooner than later, correct? Correct.
It's universally felt from the individuals I speak to, either on my show or in individuals I know that I've known for many years as sources, reliable sources of information, that the economic viability of the country, and they all pin it on this huge national debt, and they pin it on these other expenditures that have occurred that have been classified under missing, that Dr. Mark Skidmore and Catherine Austin Fitts have eloquently outlined, and I might say courageously outlined too, right? So you're a friend of yours, and our mutual friend is Rob Kirby.
Yeah.
Rob is incredibly courageous, and Rob is brilliant when it comes to numbers. Now, he's brilliant in many respects, but in particular the number side. Yep. And Rob, and this is all Rob, he educated me on this, and I ran this by people behind the curtain. Okay? And they confirmed this. Now this is what Rob taught me, and he talked about this on my show and also off air. And what he said is that, when Skidmore and Austin Fitts pushed this issue to the Inspector General of the Defense Department, and you saw the document, they got this all blacked out document that was 99% redacted, right? About the issue of this missing $21 trillion.
It's
right?
now a national security issue officially.
Yeah, right. So $15 trillion of which was related to the Defense Department, $6 trillion related to the Housing and Urban Development. And Greg, tell me if I'm wrong, but when you read that letter, what was there, the Inspector General did not say, you're wrong, and here's where you're wrong,
That's right.
Skidmore and Fitts.
Yes.
They essentially admitted that they were right, but they've decided to change the accounting rules so that this missing money would now be classified as under national security, and therefore there was no reason for the government to address the discrepancy. Am I wrong on that?
You're not wrong, but I keep telling people that this is a real number, and that this is going to be something that has to come out, and something that's going to have to be disclosed, and something that's going to be defaulted on. That's why they have this latest bilateral trade agreement between China and Russia. They're trying to get away from the dollar. I mean, there's going to be some real pain coming up. Can Trump make it past the midterm elections?
You mean with the economy the way it is?
Yeah. Can he make it? Can he make it for the last
I think it's putting duct tape and spit and sticks together to allow that to happen. But let me go back. So in that letter, the government said, we're going to use fraudulent accounting practices to cover up this missing $21 trillion.
Yes.
Okay. And Rob said, hey, Dave, that's just the tip of the iceberg. This has been going on in the private sector since 1934. I was like, what are you talking about? And here's what Rob passed on to me. A trip to the statute books show that the amended version of the 1934 Securities Exchange Act, it was changed to, quote, with respect to matters concerning the national security of the United States, the president or the head of an executive branch agency may exempt companies from certain critical legal obligations. So now, since 1934, the private sector can have all kinds of expenditures, and then according to this act, it'd be put under national security, and you can do whatever you want. It goes on. These obligations that can be manipulated, okay, include keeping accurate books, records, and accounts, and maintaining a system and internal accounting controls sufficient to ensure the propriety of financial transactions and the preparation of financial statements in compliance with the generally accepted accounting principles. Now, that was back in 1934, but it changed again. As Rob points out, in May of 2006, so up until from 1934 to 2006, the president could look at a company and go, yeah, your books are really phony. Yeah, but you know how? Here's how we're going to cover it. We're going to call it national security, and then it's not an issue. Okay? And that was at the president's discretion. And then in May of 2006, and as Rob outlined, and he cited the book entry from the Federal Registrar, May 5th, 2006, George W. Bush transferred the authority from the president to who? To the Director of National Intelligence. Now, the Director of National Intelligence, as far as I'm concerned, from that point forward, and long before that, I think it started to exist in 2006, the office, but up until the present day, and let's exclude Coates from this because he seems to be a non-globalist player, but who knows? The person who's occupied that office, Director of National Intelligence, just look under Obama, was Clapper, was a deep state player. So what Bush did in 2006, 2 years before the market imploded, he shifted the authority to essentially cover up all these financial misappropriations from the president, the executive branch of the government, to a non-elected individual who has been a deep state player. The deep state took control. Just as they took control in 1913 of our money supply, they took control of these phony accounting practices back in 2006. And the reason why I bring that up, Greg, is that what maintains a country's economic viability?
Accounting.
Faith.
Transparency.
Faith. Faith that the system is sound, legal, just, and not criminally manipulated. Well, here's what my contacts are telling me. You know, Dave, Skidmore and Austin Fitts have shown that when it comes to government appropriations, there it is in black and white, can be criminally manipulated. And when it comes to the private sector, from something as far back as 1934, with amended now in 2006 by Bush, that then transfer the power and authority from the executive branch of the government to a deep state player, the Director of National Intelligence, even in the private sector, there's no integrity. How can you have faith in a system where you can criminally manipulate the numbers? And that's why you can't even call this smoke and mirrors. That's why in our introduction, I called it vapor. And I believe Trump is aware of that. And I believe he became even more aware of that after he became president. And he had this first meeting where he looked very ill at ease.
So how do we get out of it? What's the end game? What do people need to know about how this is going to be remedied? How are we going to get out of it? Is he going to crash the system to fix it? Is that what we're shooting for now?
Well, I think I wish I had 100% answer for you and the listeners, but I know this. What are other countries doing, Greg? You mentioned it earlier. I mean, this just came out on Thursday. Russia and China prepare to ditch the dollar in bilateral trade. We have Germany doing this. We have Europe setting up their own payment system, SWIFT system, outside of the US dollar. We have other countries now doing trade in not the reserve currency of the world, the dollar, but in other currencies. We see large sovereign entities, Russia, China, India. Just the other day, Turkey announced they increased their gold reserves by tenfold. Or not Turkey, Hungary. I'm sorry, Hungary.
Yeah. Turkey sold some of theirs.
Turkey sold some of theirs, yeah. Get out of jail card. But the point is that all these entities have been accumulating a store of wealth that for the past 5,000 years has been a store of wealth when all heck breaks loose.
And you think all hell's going to break loose soon? I mean, that's
what I do. And the frustrating
even Jim Sinclair said that
is what do you and I as individuals do? This is much bigger than an individual.
Yeah.
And the only thing I think the individual can do, much like an individual that had some warnings in Weimar Germany, is to prepare. And now many listeners, the trolls out there, our buddy trolls, are going to say, oh my God, these guys, it's a bunch of conspiracy theory and this is a bunch of prepper talk and whoa, this is like crazy. Well, you know what? It isn't crazy, and it's not conspiracy theory, it's conspiracy fact, and all you have to do is know history.
Yeah.
And the folks have to realize that the hopium they're being given by CNBS and Fox Business News and the Stuart Varneys of the world that tell you to buy the dip and, hey, so Facebook went down 10 points today. Buy more Facebook. Buy more Netflix. Oh, come on. Yeah. So, and they have to realize they're being fed propaganda that's paid for by the globalist syndicate that is not looking out for your welfare. Just as Trump has pointed to the Fed, an arm, a tentacle of the deep state, take that to heart. He's trying to tell you something. My biggest threat is the Fed. If his biggest threat is the Fed, so is every American's, period.
Is he setting them up to get rid of them, the Fed?
Well, I'll tell you what
They could offload a lot of debt with Federal Reserve notes and they just have the Treasury print our currency.
And it goes back to your thing about Powell. You know, when he was interviewed on Fox Business News the other night, he was asked, he said, well, this Powell, you're kind of smacking him around verbally. Yeah. Well, and they said to him, well, you appointed him. And he goes, yeah, I know I appointed him. I get it. Okay. I'm the guy who's to blame for appointing him. Now, he didn't say he was going to fire him, right? And one of the things Trump does is he plays good cop, bad cop with the people that play on his team. And you know, Trump is not afraid of firing anybody. I mean, just look at his mantra when he was with The Apprentice. You're fired, right?
Yeah.
He has no problem firing people in his organization that he thinks is not doing the job that he has touted for them to do. And you know, is Powell playing on Trump's team? He could well be. He could well be, because what Powell is doing by raising rates, as Trump says, it gives Trump the leeway to point at the Fed. And I think when this thing goes down, he is trying to get to a situation. The deep state wants every American to point at Trump and say, he's the problem. He's the problem that the market's going down. It went down 800 the other day. Donald Trump is the problem that went down every day. And why it went down 800 points. Meanwhile, Trump is trying to set the narrative ahead of the game, being proactive, saying, it's the Fed, it's the Fed, it's the Fed. They're a threat. They're the problem. They're my biggest threat. And I think Trump is right.
The Democrats are saying, we're going to switch gears from the economy. The Democrats want the economy to implode. Bill Maher is hoping for a crash. The ultra left-wing wackadoodle liberal that HBO employs, and it probably will crash because it's way heavy, it's way high. It's higher than it ever was before. There's more debt in the world. We would have 170 trillion, 160 trillion in 2008. We have 250, almost 250 trillion in debt. So the debt load is stupendous, phenomenal, record-breaking, all-time high. But
And remember too, Greg, and you're absolutely right on that, the derivative positions, the banking derivative positions are exponentially higher today than they were in 2008.
Yes, yeah.
Which only makes that debt problem, compounds it, it juices it even more.
But the Democrats are hoping for a crash. I don't see how the Democrats. I'm looking at Drudge, and it's like how the GOP may narrowly hold on to the House. What are the Democrats running on? Raising your taxes, open borders, sanctuary cities, criminal aliens having the priority. I don't know how they get the middle. I know they'll get the wackadoodle left, who I guess are sitting around their apartments cutting themselves. But but I don't know how they get the middle, and they're certainly not going to get the right. How do they tell me they're not going to hang on to they're not going to take over the House?
They're also campaigning, Greg, on the minute we get in there, we're going to get rid of Trump, and we're going to impeach him, and then we're going to impeach Kavanaugh, and Joe Public's going, stop this. There's all kinds of problems going on in our country, in our economy, in the world, and you're going to focus on this kind of nonsense. And the other thing they're running on is the good old Hillary's thing, right? If you know
Violence.
What, if you don't vote for us, we're going to beat the living hell out of you. Oh, okay. There's a real reason. I mean, it might have worked for Mussolini, but I don't think it's going to work. I hope it's not going to be convincing for people to vote for progressives, for globalists, and let's be fair. There are a number of globalists that have an R after their name, and that upsets a lot of people. But many of these globalists that have an R after their name, let me give you an example, Paul Ryan, are not running for re-election. But still, if there is somebody, and you know, what's a litmus test I use? It's terrible to use a litmus test, but I do. It makes it easy. Where are you on the rule of law? Where are you? Are you a rule of law candidate, whether you're running for the Supreme Court of a state, or whether you're running for Congress or a state rep or governor? Where are you with the rule of law? Or are you all about rewriting the Constitution so it fits your agenda?
The Democrats just got caught again in Texas filling out more voter fraud, filling out filled out registration cards for people that they're for illegal aliens. They keep telling us there's no voter fraud, no election fraud, and yet they keep doing it. Tell me that the Trump administration has got a plan to thwart the election fraud and the voter fraud, and the Democrats aren't going to win the House.
Well, I do think they have a plan. Whether it's effective, I don't know. But I do know this. If it is being outed, and you're absolutely right, there's a report out there that they've all been filled out to, the Democratic registrations for these illegals. You didn't see any filled out, well, we're going to register you as a Republican or as an independent, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so the fact that this is being brought out, and there were some convictions in your neck of the woods, North Carolina, recently on election fraud.
Yep.
So the fact that we're seeing these issues actually, the light of truth is being shown on them, and there have been some prosecutions, in my mind maybe not enough, but still some prosecutions, it tells me that they do have a plan to ensure voter integrity. And I think some of and so some people are going to get, well, I don't see a 5-point plan that Trump is implementing when it comes to voter fraud. Well, maybe the reason is why would you show your enemies your playbook?
Right.
Right? Maybe he shows them the playbook the day after the election. By the way, this is what we did on the election fraud front, just so you realize. And here is the ramifications of what we did.
Yeah,
I believe the reason why you're not seeing individuals within the administration coming forward and saying, we're doing A, B, C, D, and E in California, and A, B, C, and D in Texas, and E, F, G, H in New York to limit, to try to reduce, to try to eliminate voter fraud, is because I believe if they open that up, then they give the criminals that are trying to manipulate the system, they give them license of, okay, they're looking over here, so let's go over there.
You think that the Republicans will hold the House?
I believe that now I know I live in the People's Republic of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I would say 95% of people in our community believe in their heart of hearts that there is going to be not just a blue wave, but a blue tsunami. And that the Dems are going to gain 80 seats in the House, and they're going to gain the Senate, and it's game over for Trump. I don't believe they're correct. I believe that when you put a platform forward that you discussed, that the progressives, that the globalist controlled,
the communists
have put forward, I don't see how the people who voted in 2016 say, I like that idea of higher taxes and letting people through the border as will, and the sanctuary city thing is great. And I really like this whole attitude that if someone doesn't vote for something that they can get the hell beat out of them and it's okay. I don't see it. So maybe I have too much faith in fellow American citizens, but I do believe there was some complacency amongst Trump voters and independents about this midterm election. And I believe that changed with the spectacle, is probably the best way to put it, of the Kavanaugh hearings. And I believe that really, really bothered men and women alike, because everybody looked at that situation and came away with their own conclusions. But when push comes to shove, take my wife, for example. She looked at that situation and she said, I truly know that too many women are abused. And we have to be cognizant of that, and we have to prosecute the perpetrators that are abusing anybody, men, women, children, whatever it might be. But she said, if you look at this and you look at the situation and you look at the lack of evidence that was presented, it is very, very difficult to say, my gosh, this really seems like a fair process and justice is being done here.
I think it was a scam. I think the Democrats came up with a scam, and it blew up in their face, frankly.
Well, and that comes into something that you and I have discussed about the triggers.
Yeah.
Right. I recently did a YouTube of the 4 triggers Trump has used to essentially implode the deep state, to drive him into a desperation panic mode where we've seen him lashing out. And one of those triggers was this confirmation hearing.
Yeah. And
because I truly believe there is a correlation, and many people disagree with me, I'm sure, on this, because I've gotten some blowback on this. But if you look at that confirmation hearing, and you and I discussed last time, when the confirmation hearing occurred, Lindsey Graham took 5 minutes of his time and asked Kavanaugh very directed questions about military tribunals,
Yes.
their use in the past in the United States, their constitutionality, and the question whether they could be utilized in the future. And Kavanaugh responded in the affirmative in all those questions and also gave the case law behind his answers.
Yes.
Well, there were a couple of remarkable things about that interchange. One is I did some research on it, Greg, and in the history of a confirmation hearing of a Supreme Court justice, military tribunals and their constitutionality has never been brought up before.
Oh, boy.
And in addition to that, Greg, and you noticed this too, I know in our conversations over time, when Lindsey Graham brought that up, the opposition was stone cold silent.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Normally they're interrupting. Right? Normally they're, hey, point of order. Blah, blah. There was nothing. And I believe they were stunned. I think this really set the mid-level puppets and the deep state and the deep state itself on notice, saying, jigs up, folks. You don't only have to worry about the criminal courts, that you might have some influence with some of the control files you have on some of these judges, but guess what? We can go the military tribunal route. And it was very soon after that questioning happened that all of a sudden folks on Capitol Hill started to tell me, it was within the next day, I started getting contacted of saying, hey, there's some folks starting to send some signals out that they got something on Kavanaugh and that it's something related to women. And, we all know that Dianne Feinstein sat on Christine Blasey Ford's information for weeks.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until after the hearings were concluded and we had the issue, and it was on the second day of questioning, not the first, the second day that Graham did this, that all of a sudden the folks I know on Capitol Hill were coming to me from various offices saying, hey, there's some stuff here about Kavanaugh that sounds not the best.
Which is a complete scam lie because they panicked. What are the other triggers?
So the first trigger, I believe, and it's something you and I have discussed before, was December 21st, 2017, with the executive order on human trafficking and pedophile networks that Trump put out.
And corruption and confiscation of property.
Bing, bing, bing.
Yeah.
Hit him in the wallet. And that's when they started going off their rocker a bit, the deep state, and trying to up the ante as it relates to this fake Russian collusion issue between Trump and the Russians. As we all know, the real collusion was between the DNC, the Hillary Clinton campaign, and the Russians. Yeah. And all you have to do is look at one and look at the creation of the fake Russian dossier.
Yeah, and the Justice Department and Fusion GPS. Yeah, that's where the collusion, Russian collusion. Go ahead.
So then the second trigger, I believe, was the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings about military tribunals.
Okay.
The third trigger was when Trump put forward, there are certain documents I want declassified, unredacted.
That's coming.
I want the FISA warrants from Carter Page. I want the text messages between McCabe and Comey. And I want the 302 forms, the forms that are filled out by the FBI when they interview somebody, of Bruce Orr, the number 4 person in Obama's Justice Department. I want them all declassified, I want them all unredacted, and I want them released. And Greg, very, very quickly, after he came out with that declassification order, Hillary came out in a tweet storm, this frantic tweet storm. Everybody associates Trump with the tweet storm. This was her tweet right after Trump came out with the declassification move. Hillary Clinton's tweet storm. This is September 18th. Donald Trump refuses to be subject to the law. Okay, this from the person who had multiple servers that were illegal, that at a minimum funneled tens of thousands of emails directly to China, that led to the assassination of at least, what I'm aware of, 18 agents' deaths. And she's talking about, okay, Trump refuses to be subject to the law, and okay, Hillary, I guess we're going to have to ignore. And this doesn't include Whitewater, Travelgate, all that kind of stuff. All that. This is just the personal server issue. Okay, then she goes on. The legitimacy of our elections is in doubt. Okay, Hillary, why don't tell that to every Bernie Sanders supporter who you cheated out of the nomination, right? Okay, she goes on. You know, in medicine, Greg, we have this term called projection, that people will project on others what they are in fact guilty of. I believe this is a case study in projection. Okay, now she goes on. The president is waging war on the truth. Okay, this from the individual whose campaign created the fake and funded, I think it cost $12 million, the fake Russian dossier, which was used illegally to gain surveillance on Trump and his team. And she's talking about waging war on the truth. She goes on. The administration is undermining the national unity that makes democracy possible. Okay, let's talk. This from the person who spoke about every person who did not support her as being deplorable, and talk about national unity, what she talked about the other day, essentially with this civility line, that unless we get control back, well, you know, there's going to be heck to pay for those that don't want us in power.
Well, that's your fourth trigger.
Well, right, and then she says, right, and that is the fourth trigger. And then she says, and then there's the breathtaking corruption. Oh my gosh. Okay, Uranium One. 20% of the rights of the uranium supply for the United States gone to Russia for $145 million donation to the Clinton Foundation. An incredible pay-to-play criminal event transaction. Okay, I mean, you know, and then you have Joe Biden right after the declassification. Trump's supporters are the dregs of society. Adam Schiff came out and said, the Department of Justice and FBI have previously informed me that release of some of this information, the declassified information, would cross a, quote, red line, end quote. What does that mean, Greg? To me, that means red line. That to me is a veiled threat at an assassination. And then you had good old Moonbeam Jerry Brown, concurrent with that, coming out and said about Trump, quote, something's got to happen to this guy, end quote. Quote, something's got to happen to this guy because if we don't get rid of him, he's going to undermine America and even the world, end quote. Okay, that was the third trigger. And the fourth trigger...
Oh, wait a minute. Does this mean that these guys are panicking? Is that what this means?
These are not statements from people in positions of power or people that are riding a blue tsunami to victory in the midterm elections. These are people that potentially are drowning in a red wave, and they know it because their internals are telling them that. And this is why they're acting out.
And
you don't say stuff like this. Greg, there isn't a day that goes by. There isn't another threat altered. I mean, just the other day, the former vice presidential nominee, Tim Kaine? Well, remember when he was on the ticket with Hillary and his kid, he was kind of a activist goofball, came out and talked about harming other people that weren't of like mind politically. Well, Tim Kaine said, what did he say the other day? We need to fight in the streets. You know, or Pelosi. Oh, here's a good one. She came out with this one just yesterday. Quote, if there is collateral damage to people who don't share our beliefs, well, so be it. Or Alec Baldwin.
They sound desperate.
The other day.
They sound
unhinged. We must overthrow the government of Donald Trump. Or Eric Holder, when they go low, we kick them. Or Cory Booker, get in the face of some Congress people, end quote. Or Hillary about, Martin Armstrong, economic guy, they quoted him in Zero Hedge about Hillary's line and he states, we crossed the line. Armstrong lashes out at Hillary advocating violence and lets Democrats win. Quote, Hillary is effectively advocating the destruction of the United States. She simply stated bluntly that democracy will no longer be tolerated unless the Democrats win and then subjugate the opposition. She says that civility can only return when the Democrats take back the government. Clearly, this is throwing down the gauntlet that it shall be their way or no way.
And the last trigger is, and this is very interesting because you told me about this, but I have kept my mouth shut about it because I promoted this on the Weekly News Wrap-Up. Rob Rosenstein, just a little background so I can speed this forward a little bit. When Donald Trump wanted to meet Vladimir Putin in a completely secure location, he used Air Force One. Nobody ever has refuted that piece of information that you dropped on this show. That's a huge piece of news. And then he also had a little plane ride with Rob Rosenstein on Air Force One. Why? Why did he have a plane ride with Rob Rosenstein, and why did this drive the Democrats crazy as your fourth trigger?
So Air Force One is considered a SCIF, S-C-I-F, a sensitive compartmented information facility. Okay? These are facilities where the most sensitive of information is discussed, is reviewed, and it is impenetrable to eavesdropping. For example, in the White House, the Situation Room is a SCIF. Air Force One, portion of Air Force One, not all of it, a portion of it, is a SCIF. And the reason why this was a trigger is, remember the history. Remember, when Trump was at the UN, the New York Times, based on information from Andrew McCabe, there's a reliable source. Andrew McCabe had leaked to the New York Times that Rod Rosenstein, who, by the way, there's a tremendous amount of information and evidence and testimony that Rosenstein and McCabe despise each other. They did not get along for an extended period of time. And all of a sudden, while Trump's at the UN several weeks ago, McCabe leaks to the New York Times that Rod Rosenstein wanted to wear a wire when he spoke to Trump and get information and make him put him in a situation where he would say crazy things, and then they could use that to implement the 25th Amendment and remove Trump from power, right? And the New York Times and the Washington Post and the women of The View and Rachel Maddow and CNN and MSNBC and ABC and ACB, they all went crazy. And they said, if Trump fires Rosenstein, well, these are grounds for Trump to be impeached, because Rosenstein is overseeing Mueller, and this is a way of obstructing justice and obstructing Mueller, right? I mean, there was all this hullabaloo, right? And then somebody asked Trump, and they said, hey, this report's out there. What are you going to do about it? And he's like, I'm dealing with stuff here at the UN, okay? He goes, we'll deal with him later. And then they show Rosenstein, right? It was almost kind of like watching O.J. Simpson in his Bronco again. The MSNBC and CNN, they were following Rod Rosenstein's SUV from the FBI building, which is only like, I don't know, it's like a couple blocks. I mean, come on. Anyway, to the White House. Trump wasn't there. And they show him getting out of the car with their zoomed-in cameras, and he's going to come out. His head's going to be handed. Comes out and said, yeah, well, he talked to General Kelly, and Trump's going to talk to him sometime next week. They got to deal with the Kavanaugh situation, and right? And everybody that whole week is breathless about how Trump is going to fire Rosenstein, all this kind of stuff. And then Trump comes back, and he said, I'm dealing with the Kavanaugh thing. Rosenstein's going to have to wait. And next thing you know, a week and a half later, as Trump is flying to Orlando, he announces that Rod Rosenstein's going to be on Air Force One. And that's when the Hillary quotes start, the Holder quotes
The
start.
end of civility, the kick them when they're down.
Right?
Yeah,
and
so what did he say on the plane? What did he tell them?
It sent a message, okay? And that for Trump to meet Rosenstein in a skiff means that they were handing over information to each other. And in fact, they were actually playing on the same team and have not been playing against each other. And it gave the deep state that indication, and they went crazy. Now, I refer people, and I sent you a picture on July 10th of Rudy Giuliani, when Kavanaugh was announced in the East Room of the White House as being the nominee. I sent you a picture immediately after that ceremony was over of Giuliani speaking to Ron Rosenstein, correct?
Correct.
Okay. When you look at that picture, Greg, now Giuliani, it's safe to say, is Team Trump, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. When you look at that picture, do you see two guys that have tremendous hatred and animosity toward each other, one of which is trying to bring down Giuliani's, the guy that Giuliani is employed by? Or do you see two guys who are happy to see each other and appear to be working together? What do you see, Greg?
They're laughing and talking and very collegial picture. So let me get this straight. So when Rosenstein was announced to go on the airplane to exchange information, the deep state went, uh-oh, we thought he was on our team. Right. He's not on our team. He's on the Trump team.
Correct. So now let me give you the background information that I have from people I trust. And what they told me was the following, that Rod Rosenstein has ties. And many people are going to say, wait a minute, look at Rosenstein's wife. She's been playing with the deep state for a long time, and so is Rosenstein. I agree with that. I believe they had been. And I believe what happened, based on what I've been told, is that some power players associated with Hillary Clinton, maybe even Bill Clinton, approached Rosenstein and said, hey, Rod, you've been playing on our deep state team for a long time, and we have a task for you to do. Because, we know everything about you. We know everything about your wife. We know, and you want to be safe. So we have a task for you. We want you to wear a wire when you meet with Trump. And then we want to utilize that information in ways in which that we can remove him, okay? So you got to wear a wire. And if you don't, well, there's all kinds of ramifications to that. And from what I understand, Rosenstein at that point agreed to wear a wire. This wasn't his idea, okay? It's being, and understand something. I'm not trying to make excuses for Rosenstein. I look at that guy, and he reminds me of some other people I've dealt with in Washington. And frankly, I'll be diplomatic. The guy's creepy. I won't tell you how I really feel. I'll just say he seems creepy. Okay? You wouldn't catch me having a beer with this guy.
Did he ever wear the wire?
So it's my understanding he did wear a wire, not when he met with Trump. He's wearing a wire in his office because he's saying, well, I'm kind of nervous about this whole thing, and I don't want to seem unnatural, because he can't wear a wire into the White House because they would have picked it up on a screen. So I think the plan might have been he was going to meet Trump at some event and then try to ask him some questions to get him, wound up on something, and then right. So he's wearing the wire as kind of like a practice situation, and as I understand it, some people walk into his office. Comey, McCabe, Strzok, and Page. And he doesn't say this. He does not say, hey, I'm going to wear a wire, because the New York Times story is, according to McCabe, Rosenstein said, I'm going to wear a wire to monitor Trump so we can get him thrown out of office. As I understand it, Rosenstein did not say that. In fact, one of the other four, and as best as I can kind of determine based on what I've been told, it could well have come out of Comey's mouth. Hey, Rosenstein, you should wear a wire in talking to Trump, and that can be used to get rid of him. Okay?
Oh, boy.
Okay.
And you think he told him this on the plane?
Let's go back to Giuliani in that picture.
Yeah.
So this was long before July 10th. Okay? Rosenstein had an affiliation with Giuliani because of Giuliani's work in the Justice Department over many decades' time. And I truly believe that Giuliani, based on what I've been told, has enormous ties at all levels of the Justice Department, right? I mean, from people who wash the floors, who've known him for years, to secretaries, to attorneys, to officials. And Giuliani got wind about the wire. And I believe that Giuliani approached Rosenstein and said, look, I understand that you've been asked to do something. And we both know that that's a bad thing to do. And an illegal thing to do. So let's talk about you playing for us. And in playing for us, we can lend some protection to you so that the individuals that wanted you to do this cannot inflict harm on you, your family, or your career. And
that's what the flight signified.
And I believe that occurred.
And that's what the flight signified.
Rosenstein never, ever wore a wire around Trump. But what he might have done is kept that wire on and monitored some other deep state players.
Oh, boy.
And I believe when the deep state saw Rosenstein on Air Force One with Trump in that skiff, they thought, and they couldn't monitor what was going on because it was a SCIF facility. They were like, oh my gosh, this guy was part and parcel of a number of our discussions. This guy, he didn't wear the wire on Trump, and they got all this information.
They warred on him. He warred on them.
Right. So, but remember, and you mentioned this before with Powell, right? Could there be almost this professional wrestling relationship where they're in the ring in the public and pounding on each other, albeit kind of fake?
That's what Jim Sinclair thinks.
And then they go into the locker room and they have dinner together.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a fair amount of that going on here.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's just stays with Powell. I think that actually, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me, and please save your emails. I understand your opinion, and you're going to disagree with me. But I truly believe that same type of relationship could well be the case with Sessions.
Yeah. Well, you've said that before.
And I'll tell you why. And that's because Sessions appointed many months ago a prosecutor out of Utah by the name of Huber.
Yep.
And Huber has been working on these grand juries and all these indictments. And a week ago Thursday, Sessions flew out and met with Huber in Utah. And in addition to that, Sessions the next day was back in Washington and reportedly under subpoena by the House of Representatives brought in some documents that they subpoenaed for them to review. And I don't know what those documents were, other than I was given an indication that several of the documents involved criminal activity by people of household names.
High up people in the government.
Correct. Now, look just what happened this week. So that was last Thursday. Now, here we go. Lamestream fake media has not talked about this. Sessions vows emergency Supreme Court battles and outrageous discovery rulings by federal judges. What? I thought this guy was doing nothing. Was compromised by the deep state. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, on October 15th, lit into federal judges for what he called a dramatic uptick in outrageous decisions threatening to interfere with the separation of powers by exposing internal White House deliberations. On that same day, Greg, headline, not from the mainstream media, Sessions appoints who? Rosenstein to lead task force against MS-13 and Hezbollah. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said on October 15th he had designated 5 groups, including Hezbollah and MS-13, as transnational criminal organizations, putting Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein in charge of a task force to target the groups with investigations and prosecutions. And 48 hours later, no, actually 24 hours later, Treasury official arrested via the Department of Justice, charged with leaking confidential information on ex-Trump advisors. So, Greg, what we've always said is there's a domino theory here. The first domino to fall was to get Kavanaugh on the court, have a potential 5-4 majority in charge of the rule of law. I believe for Trump to nominate Kavanaugh, and I've had problems with Kavanaugh, I understand this. He's tied to the Bushes. His wife is tied to the Bushes. I understand that. But I believe for Trump to nominate him, I believe Trump cut a deal with him before he nominated with him that he would push, not on the Roe versus Wade thing or anything like that. He cut a deal that you are going to be a rule of law judge if I nominate you. Is that clear? Because if you can't sign on to that, forget it. And I believe he did sign on to that. And I believe that's why Trump fought so hard for him when all kinds of stuff was being dumped all over the guy. The first domino to fall was 5-4 rule of majority on the Supreme Court. Because look what Sessions just said. Sessions vows emergency Supreme Court battles amid outrageous discovery ruling by federal judges. He's taking federal judges that are not going along with the rule of law, and he's putting their decisions square in front of the Supreme Court on an expedited basis. He didn't do this 3 months ago or 3 weeks ago. Why? Because he wasn't confident enough that they had a 5-4 majority rule of law decision-making body on that court. And now he does. And let's also face that McConnell, through the Senate, has gotten 53 federal district court judges approved, 29 appeals court federal judges approved, and now we have 2 Supreme Court justices approved, all of whom are dedicated to the rule of law.
So the question everybody's asking is, when are the indictments going to kick into high
Well, that's
gear?
a great question, and if it were up to you or me, it would have happened many, many months ago. And
Yep.
You know what, Greg? And I believe in our impatience would have been rewarded with incredible frustration and humiliation. And the reason why I say that
Yep.
is because if it was up to Greg Hunter and Dave Janda,
Yep.
all these criminal globalists that don't give a doggone about our country or a doggone about a American citizen other than themselves, they would have been brought in front of these judges who come up with these crazy rulings that Sessions is talking.
There you
And
go.
they would have been found innocent,
Yes,
and for double jeopardy, they couldn't have been tried again.
correct.
Okay, so the first domino was get the rule of law Supreme Court 5-4 majority, and some people justifiably are going to say, wait a minute, Roberts can't be considered a rule of law guy. Look what he did with Obamacare. Well, you're looking at the one guy who went off his gourd when Roberts did his flip 24 hours before the decision came out, when he flipped his decision. And yes, I believe they instituted a control file against Roberts at the time. It related to his family, and that's why he flipped his decision. But I believe since then, we have a new sheriff in town, that being Trump and the military behind Trump, and they said, okay, Roberts, you're free. You got it? You got to go along with the plan here. You got to go along with the rule of law. Your control file is deep six. You got it?
And he said
Just do
yes.
Okay, now, first domino, 5-4 Supreme Court. Other part of that domino, get more rule of law judges at all levels of the court system that we've talked about. The second domino is Trump's declassification. I believe when the declassification occurs, what happens is the following. Huber from Utah, with all these sealed indictments, not that 50,000 sealed indictments are going to be all released at the same time. Some of them are never going to be released. Some people, as it relates to financial crimes or whatever it might be, are being told, look, just leave town, okay? Just get out of Hollywood, resign from your position in Hollywood studio, whatever it is, resign from your CEO position on Wall Street, resign from Congress, and you know what? And turn evidence over against the people above you, and you go live your life. Now, if any of these individuals were involved in human trafficking or pedophile networks, that's not going to be the case. They're going down. These sealed indictments, I believe, will start to be unsealed right after the declassification occurs, because after the declassification occurs, what's going to happen, it's going to show the criminality of the former administration and high-level administration officials, including all the way up and through Barack Obama, and how the situation was manipulated, essentially on trying to remove a duly elected president of the United States, that being Donald Trump, and this being sedition and treason. And they will put these people through. So declassification occurs, light of day, the truth is shown on what really was occurring. And then what they're going to do is they're going to unleash Huber. Sessions could well, at least partially, if not completely, unrecuse himself. And they institute trials in the criminal justice system, as well as, and what comes next, what Kavanaugh was speaking about, in addition, parallel court systems. In addition to the criminal courts, they institute for the big-time players as it relates to sedition and treason. And let me give you one figure that I've spoken about this before, and I stand behind this, and I know a lot of people get mad at me when I say this. I believe one of the first players that's going to come under the auspices of the military tribunals is John Brennan, former director of the CIA under Brennan. And I believe he's going to be held up on sedition and treason charges. So, and that is when the indictments become unsealed, when this declassification occurs. Now, many people are saying, wait a minute. Trump talked about the declassification 3 weeks ago. You know, why, what are we waiting for? Well, one of the things we were waiting for is Kavanaugh to be on the bench. Second thing we were waiting for is more judges to come forward, because, again, the last thing any of us want is for these people finally to be held accountable to the rule of law, which they have skated by for decades, and then just to have them found innocent on some technicality, or because the judge presiding gives the jury instructions that the jury cannot find that perpetrator guilty, and now for double jeopardy they can't be tried.
So they get off. Right.
So in order for all this to happen, and this is why it's been so slow, this is why it's been so frustrating, this is why you and Dave Janda would have loved to watch John Brennan and James Clapper and anyone else undergo a perp walk in an orange jumpsuit a year and a half ago. I'm afraid, Greg, if that would have happened, they would have gotten off.
And they're setting the courts up so they don't get off.
Correct.
So they have people that aren't bought off.
It's not that it's going to be a kangaroo court against them.
No, but
it's just so that it's going to be a fair hearing. Because the way the system has been set up for decades, when it comes to these big players and their big deep state attorneys, these folks skate.
And everybody's bought off.
All you have to do, we started this conversation about the financial system. The financial system has been criminally manipulated by the deep state for decades. And when finally there's a hint of a prosecution against a big bank, HSBC, Wells Fargo, what happens, Greg? Do any of those banksters go to jail?
Nope.
What happens? The bank gets some piddly fine that's 1/10% of the criminal proceeds they laundered through their bank, whether it's with drug runners or whatever it might be, and all the perpetrators, the banksters, they walk.
And they're gonna set the courts up with people who believe in the Constitution, not and people that believe in the Constitution, judges that don't have a control file on them, judges that will rule based on the evidence, not the way it's set up now, where they have control files and people are bought and paid for, and the whole system is corrupt.
And we're already starting to see a semblance of that. And what am I talking about? This just happened Thursday night. Federal judge, and let's give him a shout out, Royce Lamberth, who was a Reagan appointee. Federal judge shocked to find Obama State Department lied to protect Hillary from email server lawsuits. This is what the judge said. Quote, "It was clear to me that at the time that I ruled initially that false statements were made to me by career State Department officials, and it became more clear through discovery that the information that I was provided was clearly false regarding the adequacy of the search, and this, what we now know, turned out to be the Secretary's email system. I don't know the details of what kind of Inspector General inquiry there was as to why the career officials at the State Department would have filed false affidavits with me. I don't know the details of why the Justice Department lawyers did not know false affidavits were being filed with me, but I was very relieved that I did not accept them and that I was allowed limited discovery to see what happened." In a somewhat stunningly frank exchange with Justice Department lawyer Robert Prince, the judge, Lambert, pressed the issue, accusing Prince of using doublespeak and playing the same word games Clinton played. Quote, "That was not true," the judge said, referring to the State Department's assurances in a sworn declaration that it had searched all the relevant documents. The judge says, quote, "It was a lie," end quote. Judge Lambert then went on to say he was shocked and dumbfounded when he learned the FBI had granted immunity to former Clinton Chief of Staff Cheryl Mills during its investigation of the use of Clinton's server, according to a court transcript. Quote, I had myself found that Cheryl Mills had committed perjury and lied under oath in a published opinion I had issued in a Judicial Watch case where I found her unworthy of belief. And I was quite shocked to find out she had been given immunity by the Justice Department in the Hillary Clinton email case. End quote.
Immunity goes away in a lie.
Well, let's put it this way, Greg. To the people that say there hasn't been any takedown of the deep state, there are 26 individuals that I'm aware of in the Department of Justice and the FBI at the highest levels that have either fired, resigned, or are currently under investigation by grand juries. In the history of our country, since the inception of the Department of Justice and the FBI, that has never occurred to that magnitude. And let's face it, you have to have honest sheriffs. We have to have Andy of Mayberry as the sheriff, right? And up until this point, the players, whether it was Comey or McCabe or Strzok or Eric Holder or Loretta Lynch, they weren't Andy of Mayberry.
No.
Right? No.
So it's going to get worse. It's going to get shakier.
So the first thing is they had to get the sheriff that was going to follow the rule of law. And then they had to make sure that once the sheriff arrested these people, and when you brought them to the courthouse, they didn't have some bought and paid for judge of the deep state. And that's why all this takes so long. So my hope is, what are we? We're I don't know, less than 2 weeks. No, we're 2 weeks away, right? From the midterm elections. I think right now, we have enough people, as was evidenced by Judge Lambert. Even that means we got to run everybody through Lambert. What the heck? He's obviously a rule of law guy. He's had a bunch of decisions that have been supportive of the rule of law in the past. I would start the declassification process and drop that domino right now.
Is that coming?
And that's exactly what I would do right now.
Do you think it's coming soon?
Well, I sure hope it is. And many of the people that I speak to that are my sources that come on the radio show and my other sources that don't come on the radio that have been giving me information for decades also believe the same thing. It needs to happen right now.
So that's going to be the next big shoe to drop. The declassification is coming.
That's the next domino, and that's the biggest domino, because when that happens, when that domino falls, you're going to see Huber come to the forefront, and you're going to see more overt presentation of the military tribunals, not just being discussed in a Supreme Court nominees hearing.
I just want to do this shortly because we're already into about a minute, about an hour 25. I said on my weekly news wrap up that didn't make any sense with the what happened with the Saudis. They're having this big investment conference. There's got to be hundreds of billions, if not maybe $1 trillion of investments they want to talk about. And all of a sudden, this Khashoggi, this journalist who has deep state ties, who has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, who's got ties to Intel ties, who has ties to the former government that was more extreme and radical, he dies in a consulate in Turkey. And it just doesn't sound like the mainstream Saudi family was down with chopping this guy up, which sounded really egregious. What's going on? Were they trying to get Trump to cancel the arms deal and to drive a wedge between America and Saudi Arabia and drive the oil price to $200 and take Trump down that way? Is that what was going on?
I think it could well be the case. And the reason why I say that is, this Khashoggi dude is characterized as this little old journalist who wrote for the Washington Post. Well, he did supply articles. He was kind of a contributing writer to the Washington Post, but he hadn't been there for years, right? And this guy, if you look at his past, was really, really networked with the former power brokers in the Saudi government, in the Saudi royal family. Not bin Salman, not the king or the crown prince. Okay? In fact, he had written some things and spoken in public in some venues against the reforms, if you want to call it that, the reforms that bin Salman and the king were making in the kingdom. And he, in fact, was very tied with two individuals that to me tell me that he was a deep state player as well. One was Prince Turki, and Prince Turki actually, or Turkai, whatever you want to say, was the former ambassador to the United States, former ambassador to Britain, but was also their intelligence director in Saudi Arabia. And Khashoggi, this little old country journalist that wrote some articles for the Washington Post, was essentially the spokesman for this deep state player, Prince Turki. Now, in addition to that, Greg, he was also tied to Prince bin Talal. This is the guy that when Salman took control of the kingdom, bin Talal was one of the guys that he actually hung up by his toes in the Ritz. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I'm just saying this bin Talal was always known as a deep state player. In addition, Khashoggi had ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. He was a Muslim Brotherhood supporter. And that wasn't just in the short term, that was in the long term. So this story of this innocent reporter that just got caught and they took it out on him because he was writing some articles against the kingdom, I'm not sure is the whole story, and I don't think is really quite accurate. He continued to have ties with the Saudi intelligence agencies. Now, he wrote articles, true, that were not supportive of the king, the current king, not supportive of the current crown prince. They were not fans of his. Okay. He also wrote articles about the relationship between Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Russia, and the oil deal that was occurring between the three of them. And he was actually focusing on some of the criminality associated with that relationship. As I understand it, this did not endear him to the king, the current king, It did not endear him to representatives of the UAE, and it did not endear him to representatives in Russia, in particular Vladimir Putin, because this guy was very critical of Putin as well. You are right. These people have shown to be brutal. As I mentioned, the Ritz-Carlton hanging people up by their toes and beating the snot out of them, and in several cases killing people. We all know how they deal with their, public executions, with the beheadings. Again, not exactly the most pacifist of individuals and organizations and families. They're brutal, but they're not dumb. Now, to me, it's pretty dumb to know that your embassy is being monitored and a guy's coming in and he's going to come in and there's not going to be video footage of him going out, right? So, as I understand it, what could have happened, there's this talk, well, maybe, he might be alive. No, I don't think he's alive. I think he's dead. I think that's pretty well certain. And there's this theory that he got in there and he was killed by this 15-member Saudi intelligence group, and they chopped him up and they put him in diplomatic bags, and then they left Turkey. They left Istanbul in separate private planes with him all chopped up and brought him back to Dubai and Riyadh and all these other places. Is that a possibility? And supposedly the Turks have an audio tapes and videotapes of that occurring. Now, they haven't released it as of when we've taped this, when we've recorded this. Trump and Pompeo, initially it said there was a report out that, I think through ABC and through the Turkish government, that Pompeo had reviewed the transcripts and had reviewed the videotapes and the audio tapes, and Pompeo came out and said, no, I didn't. And Trump has come out and said, I've heard about this, but I haven't seen any videotapes, I haven't seen any audio tapes, and you know what? The jury's still out on this. But, I need to see evidence. And he has cited the Kavanaugh thing.
But didn't they slaughter this guy to drive a wedge between the United States and Saudi Arabia? I mean, that's the uptake, right?
Right.
They wouldn't slaughter this guy and cut him to pieces right before a multi-billion, hundreds of billion-dollar investment council where Richard Branson, the CEO of Uber, and Steve Case and Steve Mnuchin, they weren't going to slaughter this guy in a blood-splattered, gory event, and then do this just before their big investment conference, right? I mean, somebody else has got designs to undermine the Saudi government that's in place now.
That would be stupid. So, as I understand it, here is a potential scenario that maybe's been tangentially discussed, but this guy was not a favorite of bin Salman, and in particular the Crown Prince. And I don't even know if the king had any indication that this was going on. It could be the Crown Prince did, and it's my scenario is that Khashoggi comes in. Now remember, the Saudi government had released their civilian staff. Said, you go take lunch, take a long lunch. In fact, don't come back this afternoon. Okay. Khashoggi shows up a little after 1 o'clock, and it could be that he was met by some people that were in the Saudi intelligence service. But it could have been that there was a third country that said, hey, look, this guy is not being good to you. He's not being good to us. And it looks bad if you guys rough him up, but let us lead an interrogation. Okay, let us handle this interrogation. You guys can sit and watch. Let us handle this. And it could be that interrogation went way far south and got way out of hand. And next thing you know, Khashoggi's dead.
Yeah, they didn't get out of hand. They killed him on purpose. They killed him for a reason. They killed him so they would drive a wedge between.
Well, it could be that they. I don't know that, Greg.
It don't get out of hand.
It could be that they were trying to scare the living heck out of the guy and really rough him up, and it could be something. The guy had a heart attack, an MI. I don't know.
Reportedly,
but it also could be that they had
off.
intent to kill him the minute he walked in there. I don't know. But what I am saying is a scenario that a lot of folks aren't discussing. It wasn't just the Saudis involved. It was another entity involved. And then you have to go back to the old thing, who benefits? Who benefits from this happening? Well, for example, if there's a break in U.S. and Saudi Arabian relations, who benefits from that? Well, there's a lot of benefits.
Iran, Russia. That'd be
China.
two. China.
Russia, China, Iran, just to name three. Yeah, I think that's a fair guess. Okay, so then let's ask another question. If the United States institutes sanctions against Saudi Arabia and this big arms deal is canceled, who benefits from that?
The price of oil goes up, so Russia benefits, so does Iran, and the arms deal being canceled, Iran would benefit from that, but they weren't in the embassy, Iran.
And then whoever else would now fill the void and fill those orders, right? So maybe Russia and China, right? Just to name two.
So, but Trump didn't take the bait.
So, right. So he hasn't taken the bait. And then so if Trump, and he hasn't taken the bait, because the bait would be what the deep state players are telling him to do, right? So deep state players who wanted the 20 pages about 9/11 not released to the public. Deep state players like our good friend John Brennan, right? He was adamant that they not be released. A huge number of people in Congress not being released. Now many of these same people are saying that a non-American citizen, a Saudi citizen, because this guy was not a U.S. citizen. Yes, he wrote some articles for the Washington Post. But a non-U.S. citizen went into a sovereign country's embassy and didn't come out, and because of that, and I'm not saying it's not a good thing. It's a terrible thing. But these same people that when 3,000 Americans died in 9/11, when it came to let's go for transparency, and one of the issues, and granted there should be transparency all across the board to a number of countries, including our own when it comes to 9/11, but one of the countries in question, Saudi Arabia, they blocked that information from coming forward. These same people that went out of their way to block that information from coming forward are now demanding that sanctions be instituted because of the death of a non-American in a sovereign country's in their own embassy. So if Trump took the bait and put sanctions in, you're right, Greg. What would happen?
The economy would implode.
With the price of oil would skyrocket. And in addition to that, the petrodollar, the Saudis would say, you know what? Heck with using the dollar for oil trades anymore. We're going to use the Chinese yuan or the Russian ruble.
So you're saying this turned into...
talk about a financial reset.
Ooh. You're talking about this
financial reset, and everybody would then point at Trump. See, the deep state wants they truly believe, it goes back to our initial conversation, the world economy is on shaky legs. And Trump knows it's going to implode, and the deep state knows it's going to implode. And right now, the real question is, who is the public going to believe when the finger is pointed? Trump is pointing the finger at the Fed, as we discussed earlier. But if Trump would have taken the bait on the sanctions, the petrodollar would have imploded, and then the deep state and all their puppets would have been pointing at Trump and said, see, if he didn't jump the gun on this sanction thing, this is why the world economy is blowing up. It's all Trump's fault.
And he didn't take the bait. And let's see how this transpires. That does not mean the people that led to the death of Khashoggi should not be held accountable. They should be. That's right.
And it should be based, as it is on every case, solid evidence. Documented evidence that is corroborated.
So one last thing, we are in your status report. You've given us a nice sign off and saying it's going to be the return to the rule of law. We'll all be better off. Your status report. How is it going to return to the rule of law? Are we winning? Are we losing? We the people, the deplorables. Are we winning? Are we losing? Give us your final appraisal of that, and I'll let you go.
I would say we're winning, and the reason why I say that is because of all these appointments, as it relates that we discussed earlier in this interview, and the fact that I believe we do have, and people will disagree, but I beg to differ. I believe we have a 5-4 rule of law majority in the Supreme Court. I believe Huber has been working on these indictments behind the scene, and they will be unsealed as soon as the declassification occurs. I believe military tribunals have been set up and will become more overt in their operation. But that doesn't mean that we've already won. We're winning. We're in the process of winning. We have not won. And that's why I believe these midterm elections are so important. And this is why I believe we're seeing the histrionics out of the deep state players that are middle level puppets, and why we see the Clintons and the Bookers and the Bidens and the Kanes all lashing out. Because they know if people vote for rule of law candidates across the board and don't buy into this agenda that the globalists are putting forward of no border security, sanctuary cities, raising taxes, and if you don't vote for us, we're going to beat the hell out of you. If people don't buy into that platform, the deep state players know that the rule of law will be implemented like it's never been implemented over a number of decades' time in this country. And they are, if you will, in the crosshairs of a true justice system, as opposed to a justice system that's smoke and mirrors.
Dr. Dave Janda, tell us about your radio show, Operation Freedom. You have you're up, every week. You listen to air early Sunday morning, so you'll be up Sunday afternoon with your radio show. Who's your guest on the radio show?
So the radio show Operation Freedom airs from 2 to 5 live every Sunday, 2 to 5 Eastern. Folks can stream the show at davejanda.com. All they have to do is go to the upper right-hand corner and hit that. At davejanda.com, we also have several other shows, the WTF show, as well as the Insider Insight show and the Department of Advanced Research show. We have a tremendous amount of free content on the site. We also have a subscription content, which is where these other 3 shows reside, along with the archives and the podcast. It's 30 cents a day, $9 a month. Folks can sign up for a month. If they don't like it, drop it. I also have a YouTube channel, Operation Freedom. I'm not prolific like you are, Greg. I put one YouTube presentation out a week, usually on Tuesday mornings, and then our other shows come out on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And so folks can join us on the free side at davejanda.com. They can join us on the subscription side at 30 cents a day, or they can join us on our radio show, and they can, again, stream that live free at davejanda.com, 2 to 5 Eastern. If they want the podcast, that's part of the subscription service. They can join us free on our YouTube channel at Operation Freedom. I thank you, Greg, for everything that you do. You're a very good friend, but you're also an incredibly courageous patriot that empowers people by providing them information that the bought-off lamestream fake media will never touch.
Dave, thank you, and thank you for saying we are winning. We, as in we, the people. That includes both parties, Democrats and Republicans. I mean, there's a lot of Democrats out there that have been hoodwinked. There's a lot of Republicans out there that think that all the Republicans are good people, and they're globalists too. So I like to say we, the people.
You know what? And the walk-away movement is more than walking away from the Democrat Party. It's walking away from the globalists.
Yeah.
The people that want to oppress you and strip you of your freedoms and liberties. I walked away long time ago from the Paul Ryans of the world, just as I walked away a long time ago from the Hillary Clinton and Bill Clintons of the world.
Yeah.
Right? When we walk away, we're walking toward the light of freedom, and we're leaving behind us the pitch black cave of oppression. That's where we're walking, and that's where we're coming from. And I truly believe we are winning, and we are on the right road. And I think we're very close. And that's why we're seeing the histrionics out of these middle-level globalist puppets.
Dr. Dave Janda, Operation Freedom. Dr. Dave Janda, or davejanda.com is the website, davejanda.com, and then Operation Freedom, the very popular radio show. Dr. Dave, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you, Greg, for everything you do.